I hope that you had a great break, and also I hope that your time talking about the article about CPT and the idea of being with, which is a more expansive space that we want to operate in as CPT, compared with the getting in the way understanding. I hope that that discussion was great as well. And I hope you really enjoyed the sharing in pairs about what excites you about being alive on planet Earth at this time, and also what breaks your heart. Both of those things are really important to the work within Christian Peacemaker teams, because this is not only about helping others or serving others, but it's really truly about your own healing and health and your own life expression in the world. Lila Watson, an Aboriginal elder in Australia, was known for saying, "If you've come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come because your liberation is linked with mine, then let us work together." CBT is about linked liberation. Being with others is about linked liberation. Just want to draw your attention to some parts of the article. Perhaps you already discussed it. But this type of work of linked liberation develops your stamina for difficult conversations. We also want to expand our understanding and our definition of violence. In addition to being formed in the crucible of Latin American solidarity and organizing all over the global South for freedom and anti-imperialism, CPT also responded to invitations, particularly in the areas where money of ordinary citizens was going to fuel war. This is especially intense in places like Puerto Rico that I mentioned, and also Iraq. Definitely also the $4 billion a year U.S. support of Israel and Israeli military aid was significantly troubling to those who consider themselves pacifists and people of faith who do not want their money to go to war. And so part of our work is trying to mitigate the impact of imperialism. This is part of linked liberation in the sense of we don't want to work for peace and pay for war. And to this day, part of the reason CPT is set up as it is, in terms of having few employees and more contract workers, is so that you can decide what to do with your stipend. You don't necessarily need to pay war taxes. CPT does not obligate you to do so, and as an organization, we take on the responsibility to support those who want to make a commitment in that way. We also recognize that war and violence are not just over there or somewhere in a foreign place, but the fact that the United States and Canada are also occupied land. And the work around Indigenous people solidarity and the recognition of the enslavement and ongoing killing of people of African descent in these places also demand our attention. If we're going to have people working outside of their communities in any way, we also want to give them the tools to be able to reflect how violence impacts their communities and impacts themselves. So, in 2007 and 2008, CPT recognized that we had been doing a lot of things in various places around the world and in North America, and that we needed to see that violence and nonviolence wasn't just outside of ourselves, but it cuts through the heart of each one of us, that there's a lot of violence inside us, and the way that we are going about the work sometimes actually replicated patterns of structural violence, of oppression, the way that white supremacy functions, and the ideas that we can go in somewhere and fix anything. These types of notions are very imperial. And so we began to work within the organization to see how we were structured that was perhaps repeating the violence that we deplored. And so we did a deep audit about anti-racism. And we came out with a lot of suggestions for how we can make some changes. And so since that time, including the hiring of an Undoing Racism and Undoing Oppression's coordinator in 2009, we've been working very deeply about how our organization itself can hopefully best reflect the change that we want to see in the world. This means, for example, looking at our steering committee, which is currently made up of our sponsoring bodies. Some of those bodies that were there since the founding. We've always been ecumenical, that is, having more than one Christian body a part of us, and now our membership is open to people of all faiths. But since our sponsoring bodies are historically North American and historically white, that meant that our steering committee was very white and North American heavy. So, the People of Color Caucus, now called the Race Relations Council, has a seat, a designated seat on the steering committee that has full power like any other steering committee member. And to continue to raise the profile of the impact that racism has on us, it is important that someone from the Race Relations Council is able to be at steering committee meetings. This helps all of us to remember the impacts that racism has on us, and more broadly, that oppression has on us. And it also works as a corrective and challenge to our sponsoring bodies to ask them, what are they doing to undo racism within their own constituents? But our commitment is not only based on race and ethnicity in terms of undoing oppression. We recognize also the importance of undoing sexism and undoing heterosexism. This is not just about inclusion or welcome, but it is about the fact, again, that those who are marginalized by the way that structures of power work, those who are marginalized can bring special and important insight to this work of peacemaking, whose structures will be deeply alternative to the ways things are. Also, people don't just experience something based on where they're from or what gender they are, but it's all intersecting together. The intersections of our lives bring us to the table as full human beings, our vulnerabilities and the places that we have power. And to be able to talk about this is most easily done within a community that shares an analysis about how oppression works and how power pools and flows. So later on in training, you'll have a chance to work very closely on that. This work demands that we are willing to be challenged, that we are willing to see that violence is not just outside of us, but in our own hearts. And it takes willingness to develop these authentic relationships with people who are different than us. Another paper, which I would invite you to look at after this video is finished, is the important qualities of authentic relationships across difference. It talks about a set of willingnesses. The reason I love this and why I feel it fits within a broad strokes of CPT is because we don't have all the answers figured out as an organization. Number one, we're only 30 years old. But we'll never have it figured out, and that's not the point. The point is to be willing to engage. In order to be willing to engage, you need to feel safe enough to be brave enough to ask the hard questions. And I'm committed to making CPT a place where no questions are off the table. Everything in your heart and in your head and your gut is welcome. We need your intuition. We need your emotional intelligence. We need your creativity, your imagination. And we need you to be willing to remain humble, to be willing to avoid hierarchy of oppression debates, to be willing to remain in relationship, to be willing to be honest, to be willing to challenge. Every training, we grow stronger because of new trainees that help us see ourselves again and think through some of the questions. I look forward to your feedback, both about the article related to CPT and being with. That article is in response to an article that Ron Sider and Heidi Unruh wrote. I can be able to get you copies of those if it's of interest. And to your feedback around relationships that you have had that have made you the person that you are today, and how you have strengthened your willingness over time. I mentioned that we're 30 years old and we've been through a lot. A lot of that is contained in the oral history of CPTers themselves, and some of it is contained in these books. Kathy Kern helped to write this volume of work. It has been translated into a couple of languages, including Portuguese, which is part of the reason I'm in Brazil now, with our supporters who translated all of this. And CPT has had many experiences over time, many stories as contained in the history. And another book that we self-published was this one, about the impact of the hostage crisis in Iraq in 2005 and 2006. We self-published this book because we were committed to making sure that everyone directly affected by what happens had a voice. And the publishing house that was originally supposed to do this work made Jim Loney's partner take out his chapter about what it was like to be with Jim and to have to hide during the hostage crisis. That was a really difficult time for everyone, and I'm kind of being accidentally vague right now, but because this is on the interwebs, your trainers can fill you in. But the point is, every CPTer is important, their partners are important, and we want you to know that the stories that you carry with you and the stories that will happen to you in CPT are important as well. There's a few other books published about people's experiences with CPT that help to get the word out about it, such as Shane Claiborne's Ordinary Radicals, Jonathan Wilson's Heartgrove, The Gospel of Rupa, and there are folks there who know those stories. I think we'll probably talk about the structure of CPT another time, but just to share a little bit about where we are now. We have a number of long-term teams. We also have regional groups. That means one CPTer in their area who gather around them supporters, and it can be more than one CPTer. And they work together to look at what is happening around the area where they live and using the principles learned in training and also learned from time on field teams or administrative team, they respond directly to what's around them. And so we have a few regional groups as well. The most active ones are CPT Europe and have a regional project in the Greece Mediterranean area, and CPT Oceania, which includes Australia, New Zealand, West Papua, and Indonesia, and has some connections with CPT Philippines. And they are working on indigenous solidarity in that region, also refugee solidarity, and West Papua self-determination. We're really grateful that this training could take place in Europe and be connected with many people from the region. I know a few of you, and Weldon has been an inspiration to me since high school. It was great to hang with Rombir in Greece, Harky and Annalise, the work that they've done over decades. And for those of you who I don't know yet, I'm so excited to meet you and to connect. Where we are now is that we have grown to a point where we chose to have increased focus on getting the word out about CPT beyond our traditional constituencies. And you already met Jay Yoder, Communications and Engagement Director, who's working on that. And my work is focused in 3 areas. It is around friend-raising and fundraising for us as we expand the body of constituents that support us. It's important to get the word out and draw people in and invite them to share their resources in terms of time and money and ideas, and organizational development. So we are continuously growing in terms of how we operate and trying to adapt and trying to make sure that our organizational form follows its function. So I'd spend significant time on that and work with the steering committee, especially in terms of that level of decision making for CPT. They're the ones that make the decisions around continuation of programs and some shifts in finances and faith identity work. So I'm in connection, liaison between the core and steering committee with that. Although it's, I think, important to say that in our structure we do have 3 core representatives that sit on the steering committee and are involved in every discussion. So that's a really important thing, I think, because that's unique in the world of nonprofits and NGOs to have those who are in the field also at the highest levels of decision making, and that's really, really important to us, and it's wonderful and helps to create a solid connection. Then the other piece is, again, working at those commitments to undoing oppression and helping to really continue to craft that as a lens that we use for everything in CPT. So I work collaboratively with the Communications and Engagement Director and the Program Director, Milena Rincon, as we work on a shared analysis around undoing oppressions right now, and also as we seek to serve our partners and constituents the best that we can. It is a real blessing to go out and to invite people to share their money with CPT. I feel really good about it because I know that CPT is so deeply welcoming, and I just want to share with you a story of one of our donors. I was in Kansas, USA, which is in the center. It's typically Wichita traditional territory, and the Kansa peoples, though many indigenous people were forcibly migrated to those areas. So there's many groups there, traditionally speaking. And I met a donor there who at first didn't even want to meet with me because he said, oh, just go spend your time with someone else. Like, we haven't given that much money. Don't worry about us, you know. They were very humble. And I realized through looking at our database that we hadn't had a chance to connect with them as donors before. And so I insisted that I wanted to see them and to thank them for their over a decade time of commitment of donating to CPT. And so I did, and they met me, and Willard, it was Willard and Ellen, and they shared with me of their life story and of their passion for justice and their connection and things that they had learned in Palestine, and although they had never been able to go themselves, other CPTers had gone on delegation and came back and shared, and since that time they had felt connected to those stories, and then they began to read the newsletter, one of our main communications pieces, and they learned about all the other projects that are happening and ways that they could get involved in that movement of people to take action for peace. And so they were sharing of their life, and at one point, you know, tears started welling up in Willard's eyes, and I said, you know, what's wrong, Willard? He just said, you know, I'm just so sorry that I haven't been able to give more to CPT. You saw that our donation stopped a few years ago, and it wasn't anything you all did. Sometimes my job as executive director is to notice when people's giving patterns change and to ask what's happening there and to see if we can reestablish relationship. But he said, you know, he looked across lovingly at Ellen across the table, and he said, I can't give anymore because, well, you know, I work on housing, and I began to have tremors and shaking, and my family thought I should probably retire, but I kept on working 4 more years just to be able to contribute to CPT. But at some point, they were right, and I had to rest, and so I haven't been able to make a contribution to you all. Please forgive me. And I was very moved by someone who would really, again, give of their lives to ensure the health of an organization like ours that's committed to building partnerships to transform violence and oppression. And then he became more excited, and he said, well, you see, at church, I put up a bulletin board, and we get a few copies of your newsletter. I called, and I requested them, and so I've hung a string, and I put the pin in a certain way so people can see that there are multiple copies and that they can take one. And I've been working on making that bulletin board really nice so people can come. But recently, the light bulb above the board has been out, and I've noticed people are taking fewer flyers, and so I'm really working on getting that light bulb changed. I'm going to go do that right now after our meeting. This meeting reminds me I've got to get that light bulb changed. And, you know, I figured in the end it was probably a good question. How many CPTers does it take to change a light bulb? But it was just so great to meet Willard and Ellen and so many like them who are giving of their lives in their work and of their resources. And just sending lots of love to you all, you know, for this training and your work in the field and with the administrative team. So there's a lot of love for you out there. There's a lot of love coming from where I am right now. And if you have questions, you can put them right in the comments section. I always wanted to do that, like some of those YouTube people. Right here. Let me know. Thumbs up, thumbs down. Yes, but we'll be in contact. And thank you for listening. One little piece of swag I want to share with you. So I'm here in the office. This is the first thing that the CPT words have written on. It's written in puffy paint, handmade. One of the first taglines. I'm not sure if it's backwards on the screen, so the front says Christian Peacemaker Core, and the back says Giving Peace a Fighting Chance. So, sweatshirt from the 80s, but politics from today. So, good luck with everything. Thank you, and we'll talk soon. You want to hear Marsha roll the credits? And thanks again to Marsha Lee for being behind the camera so that it made it a little easier to do this video.